Welcome everyone to this Google Hangout entitled Integral Love Relationships in Professional and Personal Life. So this is basically the second in this series. In the previous Hangout we explored a more general topic which was the 3 essentials for integral love. So that was more broad or more basic explanation of what integral love relationships is. So this time we're going to focus more on how therapists and coaches and educators, how they can benefit from the integral relationships model. But of course, as the title suggests for today, it's both professional and personal. These words are both in it, so these two things are also interrelated, which I think we will see as we go on in the call. So this course is basically relevant if you're a coach or a therapist or a health professional in some ways, looking for ways to enhance your professional practice. But of course it's also relevant if you're just a person who are interested in creating more aware and more conscious relationships. So this was this is the introduction for this call, and there's one thing that you can do while we go on in this call, and that is you can submit your questions. So if you have any questions and you're on Google+, you can submit them directly through Google+, or you can also use my email address, which is mail@heartaction.dk. So basically we announced Ole Vadum Dahl to be a part of this call, but so far I'm not sure if it's because of technical difficulties he's not really here. So I am here, and my name is Johannes Asmund Hansen, for those of you who didn't see the last call. And basically what I can say about myself is that I've been supporting Martin's work here in Denmark since 2012, where we did the first workshop. So I've been organizing Martin's integral relationship workshops since 2012, as I said, and I believe that was the way that ID Academy, which is the largest psychotherapy training center in Denmark, they also recognized Martin's work. That was through these workshops that we organized. So I've not only been working with Martin professionally, but we've also developed a quite warm friendship between us, which I appreciate a lot. So what I think we're gonna do, maybe Ole will pop in as we go, or maybe not. We can't really say right now, but so far we're just gonna get started from this from where we are. So. But I can say a little bit about Ole even if he's not here, because actually I've been following Ole's work since I was 19 when I studied NLP, and Ole was basically the person who introduced NLP here in Denmark. So what I've been seeing over the years is these changes that have been going on with ID Academy, and I think in his book Coaching, which is I guess a really one of his most famous books, he started to introduce some integral ideas, and that was the first time I saw integral ideas really being present in Ole's work, when he started to leave NLP and go more towards developing his own therapeutic approach, which is called ID therapy, which means you can say that it means integral and also dynamic, or it's based around identity as well. ID is also a word for identity. So he started to have these ideas in his writings, but now about 1 year ago ID Academy changed its whole approach to be more of or to be a completely integral psychotherapy training. So one of the first things that actually happened was the release of Martin Ucik's book called Integral Relationships, or in Danish it's called Kunne, en manual for mænd. And this book has been published in the first version, and there's a second revised edition coming very soon. So that was a brief introduction to ID Academy and the release of Martin's book, and the thing that's coming now. The next thing is that ID Academy is organizing this one-year training with Martin Ucik for professionals. So I guess that was kind of the introductions to where we are now. And then I will probably just start asking you, Martin, about this training, the upcoming training that's going to come in 29th of October. So why is this training interesting to people who work professionally with relationship? What can they benefit from this one-year training?
Hello, everyone. Let me get another sip of water. I just came back from Greece and I'm still a little bit jet-lagged. So, well, thanks, Johannes, again for organizing this, and I also want to thank the people at ID Academy to offer us all this opportunity to come together at the end of October and then 5 times over the course of a year to explore the integral relationship vision in more depth. So the question is how professionals can benefit from this training, and I think what I often encounter and what I'm actually personally contemplating quite a bit, and getting feedback from people about my book and the seminars and the talks, is that the integral relationship model, which is based on Ken Wilber's vast teaching that he developed over 30 years, seems to be quite complex, for some people who are exposed to it for the first time, and I totally understand that somebody who is struggling or has some relationship questions, rather if a person is in a relationship right now and it is not as fulfilling as the person expects it to be, or if a person is single and longs for a partner and doesn't really know where to find the right person and pick the right person, there is always specific questions. And so if I talk to individuals, then of course I can listen and hear what the problem is, and then having this vast toolbox available, how I see the integral relationship model, I can take out a particular tool and usually then use that tool to address the particular challenge that a person is facing. And one thing I did is that when I wrote Integral Relationships, I started to collect and expand my collection of relationship books, which then grew to over 300 out of maybe 30 that I had when I started. And of course there is a vast amount of knowledge in all these books, and the integral map in a way helped me to put these books into the map and locate them based on the integral model. And so the interesting part that I find in this professional training, which the idea for it came up last March when I did a tour in Europe, and I realized it would be really beneficial for people if they could participate in these workshops with somebody local, and then also have follow-up meetings and have local therapists or coaches who are trained in that work and do it in their local native language and not in English or German when I'm in Germany. That this would really be beneficial to furthering the integral vision and integral relationship vision. And as much as I like to travel to Europe and to get to know all these people, of course it's quite an effort and cost intensive for me to travel from California, which then increases the cost for the workshops and the trainings and whatnot. And in thinking about this and discussing it with ID Academy, we realized that it would take probably a one-year training, or it will take a one-year training for people to really immerse themselves into this teaching. And to answer that question, obviously, when professionals have all these tools available and then work with individuals, they can use the appropriate tools and it can address relationship challenges at what we call the level of consciousness of the client that they have. And one element that we will start a training with and that is really helpful is that what we call these 4 essential dimensions of our human being. You know, the personal interior I, where our consciousness is, where our worldviews are, where our spiritual development is. So this is usually where most therapists and a lot of coaches are focusing on, is on this interior consciousness, awareness development. And also, if therapists work with clients, they often address shadow issues and unconscious behavior patterns, you know, repeating, being attracted to the same kind of person over and over, and so on and so forth. So that is, of course, a very vast and a very important area for relationships. But in the integral model, it's only 1/4 of the 4th dimension. The other dimensions that we're looking at is our physical body and all the hormones that are related to it, and something we call the primary fantasy, what makes people, men and women, physically attractive to the opposite sex. And this is an area that people often don't really like to talk about and address, because it is often very painful for people to be rejected for not being tall enough, or not being pretty enough, or not having hair and things like that. And it gets sort of like brushed under the rug, and obviously when a lot of health conditions that may be purely physical or psychiatric versus psychological can really affect our relationships. So that would be the second dimension, would be our physical body besides our interior consciousness. The third dimension in the integral relationship model that we're looking at is our social physical environment. Very often, you know, this relates to our job, to our home, to our lifestyle choices, and so on and so forth. And when we get to meet somebody and we date that person, we rarely, you know, encounter that person in their normal day-to-day lifestyle. I mean, we all know, at least I speak for myself, you know, when I date someone, I clean up my room and I maybe dress a little bit more nicely, and we often show ourselves from our best side, and even though I don't do that, I know some people often consciously or unconsciously misrepresent themselves about their social status and their lifestyle and these things. But then when people really start to try to co-create a life, these different choices that people make in these different ways, how we live today, they very often clash, and there are just incompatibilities or things that need to be negotiated in what we call our social dimension of our life, you know, where and how we live. And there's often little things like hygiene, or do I want to live in nature or in the city, and how much money do I want to spend on things that need to be addressed. And even though they're all rooted in our interior consciousness, in our worldviews, and how we view the world, they co-emerge. They're separate and linked together. And then the final dimension that we're addressing is really what nowadays we call the V-space. It is our way to communicate our thoughts and our feelings, and to find compromise without compromising ourselves. And what kind of style of communication do we use, and what kind of rationalization for our, what we technically call validity claims, you know, what we believe is true and what we believe is the right thing, that might be very different for our partner. And the integral model has a lot of different communication tools, not just one tool. You know, there are so many ways of finding agreements, and when people use different tools or have different levels of consciousness, which are then reflected to the way they communicate, there can be a lot of communication problems. And of course, there's personality types and a lot of other elements. And as you listen to this, you probably already realize this mushrooms out fairly quickly. And very often individuals don't feel, well, I don't need to know all that stuff, and when I give my 2 or 3 hour presentation, very often people come to me and say, well, that was a lot of material and most of it was over my head, but this one thing you said about this or that really hit home with me. And then if I talk with 10 people, everybody says something different hit home with them, right? So I never really know. And of course, people naturally say, well, why don't you leave out all the other stuff and just focus on that one thing that I found really interesting? But, if we ask the whole group, then most people found something different interesting. And so this is why this training makes maybe most sense for professionals, because then when they work with an individual, they can see in which of these 4 areas that I mentioned, basically body, mind, communication, culture, cultural background, and social environment, in which of these areas is the bottleneck, and then having inside these areas many tools available to address that and work with the client. And I'm often reminded of this quote by Abraham Maslow, if the only tool you have available is a hammer, every problem pretty quickly looks like a nail, which just means that, if somebody's deeply trained in NLP, for example, that you mentioned, then they will address every relationship problem with the NLP tools that they have available. If somebody's trained in Jungian psychology, then they will probably do a lot of shadow work and work with the anima-animus complex and things like that. If somebody's more a coach, they may work more in the social environment and behavioral way and setting goals and reaching certain, often materialistic goals and shared values. And if somebody is a nonviolent communication trainer or other forms of communication, then they will reduce the relationship problems also. Well, you just need to find a way to communicate with each other. And while all these things are valid in themselves, they're often not addressing really the issue at hand, let alone talking about sexuality and spirituality, and personality types. Again, if somebody's trained in the Enneagram, then they will reduce in a way all the relationship issues to typology. And the integral model simply says, well, all these aspects and these tools that are available, they're all very helpful and totally valid, but partial. And the integral relationship model, which is constantly expanding, it's not something static. I just told Johannes, I finished writing the current book 4 years ago, and some people find that very complex and overwhelming, and I'm constantly adding parts to their teaching and working on a new book, which partly we will bring into the training that we start at the end of October. So again, to summarize, of course, I personally wrote that book for myself initially because I felt to have a healthy relationship in Northern California, where I used to live. I'm now in Los Angeles temporarily, or I don't know how long I will be here. That there were a lot of demands from the women that I met, and that was first very puzzling to me. And the more women that I dated and that I met, the more different their demands were, and this is how I learned a lot of these things. So a woman, again, who was very much into typology, astrology, Enneagram, she was very interested in these aspects. Then maybe the next woman was very interested in nonviolent communication and wanted me to share my feelings and my needs and understand her needs and interpret her, her behavior correctly and things like that. The next woman maybe was very much on a spiritual path, and for her, awakening in the relationship and doing spiritual practice was very important. The next woman maybe was a psychotherapist and wanted to do shadow work, and I could go on and on. Maybe the next woman really wanted to further the career and make a lot of money, or have a child, or do tantric sexuality. on and on and on and on. It didn't stop, right? And at one point I realized that, you know, I wanted to be able to meet women, you know, in whatever desire they had in a relationship, and started to do all these workshops and read books and dated a lot, and then everything came together in integral relationships. So some men like you, Johannes, and other men, and then also other women, they were really interested in having like these, you know, relationships that really address all these aspects: body, mind, heart, and soul, you know, on in a relational level, on many levels of consciousness and expression. But other people, they might just go, well, I just want to work on my sexuality in the relationship, or I only want to work on my spirituality in the relationship. I only want to work on healing psychological wounds, or I only want to work in creating a home and a family and furthering my career, or I only want to learn how to express my feelings. And then, of course, for them, the integral relationship model is very overwhelming because it addresses all these other parts. So a professional therapist, coach, teacher, trainer who has all these tools available then can customize it for the particular group or individual or couple that they're working with. And this is why I think this is so important, you know, and maybe even more important than to work with individuals is to train a larger number of people who can then, you know, work with individuals, which I by nature just cannot do.
Yes, so just to sum up a little bit what I hear and what your answer to this question, how it can benefit people who work professionally, coaches and therapists and teachers and people like that, is that they get this kind of a background understanding. You could also maybe call the integral model a map, or as you say, it's constantly evolving. So it's not like it's the complete or full map, but it's the best offer to create a holistic or an integral map that includes a lot of other kinds of thinking. Whereas other relationship workshop, they might just give you one tool, they might give you the Enneagram, or they might give you some communication skills or some therapeutic approach. So one thing that you can give to these professionals in this workshop, as I hear it, is that you give this background understanding that allows you to meet many different peoples at different levels where they are at, because you're not limited in just one perspective. And so this is the background understanding, and that leads me also to the next question that I want to ask, and that is, so there's this whole understanding of the map, but what kind of specific tools are then taught in the workshop? You mentioned some yourself, but maybe you can just give an idea to people who want to know more concretely what's actually going on in the workshop, and what kind of tools are you teaching now?
Yeah.
Or not in the workshop, but in the training.
Yeah, in the training, yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm as much as I'm, you know, like to talk about this and write books. Whoever's been in one of my workshops, they realize, and often to the surprise of people when they start, is that it is very experiential. So I mean, I often feel, you know, we can learn things from books, and sometimes, of course, it helps to hear it and to have questions answered. And again, you know, since Ole is also not online, if you have any questions, please put them into Google Plus or share them with Johannes. But to answer your...
Actually, I have to say something, because there's something, also another technical issue, is that the question and answers on Google Plus seems to be not functioning. So if you want to hand in any questions, you need to write it to mail@heartaction.dk. That's my email address. So it's mail@heartaction.dk. Because I don't think the Google Plus, for some reason, it doesn't work with the question and answers today. But you can use the email, and I will check that during the call.
So the first thing, and that will really permeate the whole year is that we will engage in a spiritual practice that will allow us to explore, these 5 stages of spiritual development that Ken Wilber has mapped out for us based on many Eastern traditional teachings, and which is a little bit based on Daniel P. Brown's meditation training, where we go from a gross to a subtle to a causal. I say that's okay. So in other words, disidentifying with our physical body and environment, right? Knowing I'm not my body. I have a body. I'm the witness of my body. Then doing the same with thoughts. I am not my thoughts. I'm the witness of my thoughts. I have thoughts, but I'm not defined through my thinking. And then to look at our feelings and experiences below thought, and also realizing I'm not my feelings, my thoughts. I have experiences. I have feelings. And then depending on where somebody is, that will make people prone to drop into this stage of being the pure witness, where there is no more subject-object split, an observer that observes the body, the world, thoughts, emotions, feelings, experiences. And then that will lead us to some level of non-dual awareness. Is obviously we cannot remain in this pure witness stage where we're no longer aware of any subject-object split, and then build basically on this non-dual awareness of emptiness is form and form is emptiness. So this spiritual component, I think, is very important to provide a container for the whole training, and also for then working with people who are on a spiritual path and want to use relationship as a spiritual path. And this then will tie in with the end of the training of identifying an authentic evolutionary purpose and sharing that with a partner, which, as far as we can tell today, can only emerge out of a deeper spiritual, evolutionary spiritual practice. So that will be the first part, and then that will go through the whole training.
So to have a spiritual and introduce people to how they can create a spiritual practice too.
Right.
Yeah.
But it will not just be whatever spiritual practice according to Martin or Buddhism or something, but it will really lead us through different stages, or stages as we call it, of spiritual development. So that at the end of the year, everybody is somewhat at the same level. And for some people, that will be a relatively new practice, related to mindfulness training and things like that. And for other people who are already practitioners for many years, that may not be so much a new thing, but it is important that we all together engage in this spiritual training. And then
so the group will have a common thing in having a spiritual practice that can be shared as a, you could say, a we space or something that's shared in the group.
Right. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that people have to give up the spiritual practice or religious background or whatever they have. It will just frame that in a larger context, so there is no relearning or redoing. We will just verify what spiritual practice do people have, what level of spiritual realization are they at the moment, and how can they develop, towards this non-dual awareness and having an evolutionary spiritual practice. Then the next area will be this framing of these 4 essentials that we have already spoken about quite a bit. Our interior consciousness, worldviews, values, spiritual realization, aspects of the physical body and how that relates to relationships. We will look at learned gender roles, which are, we're socialized in and be learned about, versus biological sex, so the issues of nurture and nature, which is an ongoing dialogue, that's in the integral community and throughout the world, is equality between males and females, while at the same time maintaining some polarity and honoring our differences. So, where are we the same? What is learned and can be transcended, overcome, and where are we different? And then last but not least, again, the how do we communicate with each other? So that will be the first part. And then in the second part, and that is, of course, something that people who are not familiar with integral often find very complex, is that the integral model is not just like a puzzle piece or a one-dimensional map that you mentioned, Johannes, right? That you look down on and it's flat. It's also, it has levels of development. It's three-dimensional, and so we will study for quite some time in quite some depth these levels of consciousness development, which I often like to relate to relationship book. And I think Ole just joined us.
Yeah, seems.
Yeah, I see him.
You're with us, Ole.
Hi.
Can
you hear me too?
we can hear you, yeah, and we can also see you. So
very good.
We got your message that you had some technical problems, but it's very nice to see that you managed to join.
I solved it. It took a long time though.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
but I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just rambling on. So we wanna.
So we were just in the middle of talking about what specific tools are going to be taught in the one-year training with Martin. And Martin mentioned spiritual practice as one thing, and that would be the most important element, so to speak. And then you continued, Martin, and were you finished with where you were going?
Yeah.
Or
Maybe I just finished it so we're not ending in the middle of the sentence. Obviously, we're going to look then at developmental models of consciousness, of anima, animus, complex, sexual development, spiritual development, and we're going to look at personality types, and then towards the end of the training, we will focus on sharing an authentic purpose in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe I could return to some of the questions that I actually wanted to ask Ole about in the beginning, because I was actually introducing you a little bit and talking about where you came from, and you started to make ID Academy into an integral psychotherapy training just recently, maybe 1 year ago, something like that, or maybe not even. But
the funny thing is that we actually have been integral for maybe 12, 13 years in a specific way, which is too complicated to account for here. But we started being more consequent with the kind of Ken Wilber-oriented way of being integral with the Aquil model. A couple of years ago, actually 2.5 years ago, I started doing some internal training with the faculty of the teachers, and we started going more in the direction of using the maps from Ken Wilber in our training. So it's not that we haven't been integral. We just thought we were integrative for many years, not knowing that the way we were integrative was more integral than anything else. And this gets complicated because then you have to talk about what's the difference between integrative and integral, and I don't think that's relevant. But we are certainly we haven't changed what we were doing already. We have just made it. We have expanded it. We have added a lot to what we are already doing. So for people who know our concept from earlier days, they will still recognize it, and it's still unique in our own. In our own way, but we have had the great benefit of adding Ken Wilber's universe, so to speak, to our way of working. So.
And as I also mentioned in the beginning, that actually the first time I saw you mentioning some integral ideas was in your book Coaching, and that was way before you actually made this more, you could say, this more this shift that appeared when you started to release integral books, and maybe talk a little bit more about integral. So you had the ideas all along, but there was a shift happening now.
In 2006, actually, there's a chapter in my Coaching and the Art of Living book where I use Ken Wilber's quadrants, and I arrange it slightly differently, and I present a model which, to my great surprise, turned out to be something that the integral life practice people call the 3-2-1 model, and also if you look, even when you look at the book, then you'll see that actually I have the 4 drives of a Holland in presented on the front page. But again, that's much too complicated to get into that right now. So we have.
But what I was trying to go to was that there has been a shift more towards integral. It was there all along, but now it's becoming more official. And you made the publishing company, which I think was what really made it visible for people. That now you're really you're putting integral on the menu, so to speak. And then I wanted to ask you about the first. So you released the first book, which was actually Martin's book. And what made you think that Martin's book or visions about integral relationships would be beneficial for coaches and therapists and the people you train on ID Academy?
Yeah, actually we're using the book in our psychotherapy training, and we're going to use it also in my 1-year mentor training in the future. So there are several reasons. In the first place, I have also written a book on couple therapy and how to grow in a love relationship back in 2001. So I have an interest in the topic, so to speak, and I've been writing a lot about that. And what I found when I read your book, Martin, is that it had a very, very unique approach to working with what happens between 2 people in a love relationship, in a sexual relationship, which I hadn't seen anywhere else. I read quite a lot, and as most of the people here probably read quite a few books on communication and love relationships and couple therapy, stuff like that. And I mean, all good books, you know, with different angles. But what you did in your book, Martin, was something which was kind of very unique and very new for me. And I think what I am thinking of in particular is the focus on what does it mean for people in a relationship that they each are in different stages of growth. So that actually I've been writing about that earlier. What would be the difference between somehow relating in a love relationship from the personality, from the ego stages, and what kind of a different relationship would you have if you were in have moved more to essential stages of being, or more transpersonal, or we could also call it spiritual stages of being. But I haven't been as specific as you, Martin, in your book, and I think what is very, very important and what is totally overseen in couple therapy is that many of the conflicts we have in our love relationships is because of different stages of development. It's not just a matter of disagreeing on all kind of different things, which we all know what we can disagree upon, lots of stuff, or being hurt, or feeling abandoned. All this is very common themes. But what really was striking about your book, Martin, was this description of all the developmental stages we all naturally go through, not only as children but also as adults, and what they mean for a love relationship. That a lot of, I mean, I'm pretty experienced with working with therapy for more than 30 years and coaching for also a couple of decades, and for me it was kind of amazing to see that I had also kind of overlooked the importance of what developmental stages mean, because according to the integral psychology, we all go through maybe 12 or 13 stages of development, if we imagine from our very birth till we potentially reach a very high level of consciousness, a more spiritual, transpersonal level of consciousness. And all these different stages, they have each their characteristics. We have a particular way of viewing the world, of viewing love relationships, and so on. And also we go through different, according to your book, Martin, we go through different stages of sexual development. I think you mentioned 5 or 6 stages of development, which, I mean, I haven't heard any of the people working with sexuology or working with sexually oriented psychotherapy who mention that at all. I mean, what that means, how different you look at sex, how different a relationship you have to being sexually together with another person, and so on. And I think all these different stages are so important. I think the closest I've come to anything which matches your book is the Jungian description of how the anima and animus, the inner man and woman, is developing, and what that can mean for the attraction to the opposite sex, which you also include in your book. But the variety of different areas we can actually grow in a relationship, and also personally, and the importance of these different areas, or lines as we call them in Integral, that's totally overseen in basically any other book about and any other training in couples therapy or couple counseling, or so I think that really was something unique and totally new and very important. So that was one very important reason, and the other one is that the book is also a fantastic introduction to the whole integral, call it philosophy or psychology, but actually it's just a description of a new emerging consciousness which is popping up in our part of the world, at least. So the book is a fantastic introduction to integral philosophy, integral psychology, a very practical way of working with human growth and human awakening. So I think those were the 2 most important things about the book. So I think the book is very important, and I think it needs to be. I mean, I think, to be very frank about this, I think that that people working with couple therapy, people who are couple therapists, people who are working with counseling around sexuality, sexuologists, and so on. I think if they don't get the content of the book, I'm not going to say you're lost if you don't read Martin's book, but if you don't get acquainted with the content of the book or what that book tries to convey, I think you're going to be left behind, because in the future there will be the problems that couples will come with in the future. In just a few years, it's already happening in a lot of places. People trained in traditional psychology or traditional couple therapy, there will be great areas they will not understand, or there will be great areas where they will make kind of wrong dispositions in their way of trying to help people, because there's something about this new emerging consciousness which we need to understand, because it's so radically different. I mean, there are some stages of development which the old schools of developmental psychology have not described. I think if we have been in Denmark, if you have been studying as a school teacher, or you have been studying as a nurse or something like that, you will know all the good old developmental psychologists, Piaget or Mahler and Winnicott and all these guys, and maybe there's Freud and Jung and so. And all these great pioneers within psychology, they described our development to a certain point, and then they stopped, because as a human species we hadn't reached further. But something has happened the last 20 years, I think, in particular, and is still happening in the development of our consciousness, which has not been described by these older pioneers within the field. So in order for us to help modern people and postmodern people, people of our time and people in the future, we need to reorient ourselves. We need to start adjusting to new ways of perceiving love, sexuality, life, feelings, which has not been very obvious before. So that's why I think the book and the training is very important. That was a lot.
Yeah. So you can say that maybe it doesn't really matter if you call it integral or whatever you call it, but people who are working just with one approach, it's like when you have an integral map or a model, you have a lot more tools to work with, and also tools that maybe are invented to solve problems that are coming in the future, or issues that people are facing in the future.
Yeah. Let me give an example. I hear a lot of people having difficulties in their love relationships because one of them is actually starting to experience themselves, their own identity, their meaning of life in a new way, in a different way. And if you go to a typical couple therapist, they will try to relate that to something in the past. It might be some escape, or they will focus on how the one person might feel abandoned and the other one is striving for freedom, and they're related to early stages of development usually. or they will try to do something about the communication. A couple therapies are very based on teaching the couple to communicate in a more constructive and clear way, or a more honest way. Or some will focus more on expressing feelings and underlying needs instead of just blaming each other and criticizing, and being positive in a way of stating what you need and all these kind of things. And they're all wonderful ways of working with couples. They're just a couple of, they're just two of many. But I think that a lot of the themes emerging in these years between couples have something to do with that one of the people is growing into a new stage of consciousness, which has a very different focus, which has very different priorities. And if you don't understand that as a psychotherapist, and if you don't take that into consideration, and if you don't know how you're going to help people who are now living in two different worlds, then I think you're not being able to help them. And I think what is so great about Martin's book, and also about the content of the training, is that that will be a new world for most even experienced psychotherapists or experienced coaches or a couple counselors. What kind of dimensions will be turning up in their therapy, which they might totally overlook if they don't get this information. So that's why I and it's not only this is not only about couples therapy or couples counseling. This is altogether about the way we as professionals work with therapy and coaching in the future. I mean, that will change a lot, because we are going to work with some stages of consciousness which has not been very common before, but which will be very common in the future, in the near future. So, do you agree on this, Martin? You're not saying much.
Well, I've been talking for the first half hour, so I'm
okay.
sure people appreciate to hear your perspective. And I mean, obviously, I couldn't agree more with what you said. And I thought you brought some really important additional aspects to it, that the level of consciousness of the coach or therapist themselves defines basically the level to which they can help their clients, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
and the beauty of the integral model is that for the first time, somebody at this level can see that people actually do develop and are at different levels. So usually when we talk to someone and we are in this, what we call this old type of consciousness or first tier, we try to either bring people up to our level or pull them down to our level, because that's just the level from which we see the world and address every problem. And when we're integrally informed, then we can really meet people at their level and also realize if they just need to translate or implement better at their level, or if one of them, as you mentioned, has already grown to the next level, and then support the other partner to meet the person in their growth. And very often people work, which is of course valid, on better, what we may call healing and integrating, using the tools at the level where they are, and not doing so much what we call transformation to the next higher level.
Yeah.
And so the therapist and coach that wants to help people in this transformational process obviously needs to be at a higher stage of consciousness than their clients. Otherwise, they get lost.
Yeah.
And that is true for consciousness and sexual and spiritual and all these different developmental lines that we're going to address.
Maybe I can illustrate this a little bit, because it can become very abstract for many people who are not acquainted with this idea about different stages of development. I think we are kind of comfortable with the fact that children go through developmental stages that we know we're not going to expect from a 4-year-old that they are able to make kind of great abstractions. For instance, we know that they're very concrete in their way of perceiving things. We don't expect them to understand irony or particular jokes, for instance, because that will. I mean, they need to have developed some cognitive skills or ways of perceiving things in order to experience that. And they take kind of, I know from my own small children, they take metaphors totally literally. I mean, they will not understand that a metaphor is a symbol of something else. So they will take it literally. And it's the same way with adults. I mean, we still have the possibility to grow as adults, and so our way of perceiving things will change over time. We cannot, when let's say, with just to play with some abstraction here, if we are on, let's say we have 10 potential levels of development, and we are at level 5, we will not understand level 6 or 7 or 8. I mean, we might have a theoretical idea about how we would perceive reality when we are there, but we will not really understand it. And and that is what can create great trouble in couples. You know, that they are somehow tuned in to each their channel. Yeah.
I feel like actually joining with an example, because when I discovered Martin's book, I was just coming out from this relationship crash where I was in a lot of pain, and reading about the stages and the integral model was making me slowly discover that actually maybe it was not really a crisis, maybe it was more a growth or an evolution into a higher stage that was happening, and letting go of some old ways of relating, actually. So maybe that would also be a point for people who work with people, that to start shift the idea that you have these crises and more view it as a potentials for growth. What do you think about
that's a good point?
Yeah, I had often heard, from women that they said, well, I was with this partner for 2 or 3 years, and then I learned everything from him, that I could, and then, I felt there was a shift in my development, and then I found a new man who I could develop the next things, and so there is this kind of sense of serial monogamy or even non-monogamy, and I was wondering, as one part, why can't couples really grow together through these stages? And so that's one thing that fascinates me. And again, if there is people who are trained in guiding couples, I mean, first, if people are single, to find a partner who's at the same level of development, but then not, then really make an agreement and understand what a roadmap is to further healing and learning and growth.
Yeah.
Then people can co-create more sustainable relationships, because we all know that breakups are always very disruptive on many levels. And even though there is always a lot of learning and healing potential in a breakup, I think there is also as couples who've been together for 20, 30 years all report that together they have realized a lot of healing and growth potentials.
Yes.
And that is something that personally is dear to my heart, that couples can go through these stages together, and having a local coach, therapist, trainer, person who can do workshops around this in all the countries of Europe and ultimately around the world is something that I would be very grateful for if that we could manifest that. And that's the first invitation, together with ID Academy, for people to become these pathfinders and these leaders who support singles and couples in creating more sustainable, healing, growth-oriented relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Actually, the question and answer thing on Google Plus was somehow not activated, but one question at least popped in my email now. So maybe we can talk a little about or answer that question. So I'll just go there and read it. So the question is from Frey, and he asks, I think the problem is more than one of the couples have awakened to a more spiritual or loving level. No, actually, I think the problem is more that none of the couples have awakened to a more spiritual or loving level. Most conflicts are due to two egos hammering together. If one have awakened to a new level, there will be nothing for the other to hammer into. This is the question.
Mm.
So,
do you want to address that, Ole?
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as that, because it's not either ego or not ego. There are a lot of developmental stages within the ego which can actually create a lot of conflict. And there are also constructive stages within the ego from where people can start dealing in a very creative and a very loving way with each other. I mean, if we were all going to wait until we had transcended the ego, had moved beyond the ego, we were going to wait a very, very long time with having good relationships, because that's somehow an illusion to think that we can just go from ego to not ego. I mean, that for most people that will take so many years that they're not really interested in love relationships anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're dead. So and also even when you have reached a more transpersonal level of consciousness,
I don't know if we lost Ole's sound or.
Because otherwise they wouldn't function in the world. I mean, they wouldn't know what. Did we lose contact?
We lost your sound for a while, but you're back again. So maybe you can say it again, the last part.
So what I said was that even we have reached the transpersonal level of consciousness, we will still have egos. That's it's still a function which is important. As long as we live in a body, we need to have ego, because the ego is somehow our vehicle. It's what we need for relating to other people. We cannot just be in transpersonal states without having a body or having an ego structure. So I think it's not a matter of either or we don't have to wait until we have transcended our ego to have good love relationships. And having said that, of course, the more developed we are, the more compassionate we are, the more tolerant we are, the more accepting we are, the more difficult it will be to get us into conflict or into drama, because we simply don't believe in it, or we are not identified with it. Mm-hmm. But you don't need to be a saint or a sage to experience that. I mean, there are still stages within the ego structure which are so advanced and developed and creative that it's not a problem, and where we are open to our spirituality, where we are open to spiritual stages and states, not the least. So I think we need to be have more nuances about that, or be more detailed about that. So I think I've said it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally agree with what you said. These are two different forms of development: spiritual development and ego development. Mm-hmm. And to understand the difference is a big part of the integral model.
Mm-hmm.
And how to integrate both of them. They're not disjoint. They're integrally interwoven with each other. The spiritual development. So partly that the person who asked the question, I think, is right. That a relationship can help us in our spiritual development, which we could summarize as ego transcendence. And the relationship also helps us in our healthy personality or ego development, which happens usually off the meditation pillow, and where our different worldviews and shadows and all these other things, and just how to realize our day-to-day life in a practical way, then often clash into relationship and to do healing and growth work there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to bring in just one more aspect to that when a lot of people, when they think about relationships, is really looking at each other, and saying, okay, there is these egos or non-egos, and there is these two people, trying to co-create a relationship. But what's important, and which we will also bring into the training, is this idea of really sharing a purpose, which gives sort of like I see it as a third leg for the relationship, where then it stands on three legs and not only on two, which makes it much more stable. Is having this shared purpose, serving the world in a bigger way than either individual, as an additional aspect.
Just before we go on, we're actually a little bit over time, and I want to again apologize for the question and answer thing on Google Plus not functioning, but it seems like that it was too difficult to remember the email or something. But we have this one question that we just answered, and then we're gonna find a way to end also this call in a meaningful way. So maybe we could return also a little bit to talking about the training, because there are these different modules of the training, and then there's an optional facilitator training module, the last one of them. And what is that about? Or could you explain a little bit about that, Martin?
Yes, as I said at the very beginning, that integral is often seen as like being like a lollipop. It has a big head and a small stick, and the embodiment is much more important. I mean, both are important, the theoretical understanding, but the embodiment is ultimately where the rubber hits the road. And I have designed a few years ago an experiential workshop that I have given all over the world, and which works really well. And So this last part, which is an optional module, is for people who want to offer these workshops in their local area, in their local language, in their country. And of course, the prerequisite is that the theoretical understanding of what is taught, but this will just be an additional training where people will actually practice in the group context to facilitate all the different exercises and to hold space. And also there will be some training how to provide value to the participants in a way, that people who offer these workshops can be financially compensated. So very often, we experience now there is more and more people who offer workshops and trainings, and fewer people who are really making money doing that. And there is often a disconnect, between participants perceiving the value of the training. So we will also talk about that. Not only how to facilitate a workshop, but also how to market them and how to make them beneficial for both the practitioner that offers the workshop and the participants.
Johannes Asmund Hansen, advarselknap.
So we have a little bit of technical issues. Okay, so that was a little bit about the last part of the training, and I don't know if there's anything we need to add here in the end.
I just want to add one more thing. So in the next step, there are people who listen to this and they may have some specific questions, and I will offer everyone who's interested in the training a 1-hour free session where I answer questions and where we really find out. It's a large financial investment and time investment. I understand that, and I want to give you, my full attention and my time to find out if this is really beneficial for you in the long run, that you get a return on your investment of time and money in your work and also in your personal life. Because obviously we understand this training is not for everyone, but for people who have worked professionally, as Ole already pointed out, in the relationship arena, even if maybe right now it's not so clear that you may need this work. I think we all agree that very soon, if not already now, you will need these additional tools in order to provide your clients with the best value. And that should be ultimately everybody's therapist and coaches intention, is not to sell their ideas, but really to provide value and provide the best service to their clients and therefore humanity. And Ole and I obviously agree that having all these tools available is really essential for doing that.
And to contact Martin about this free session, you can go to his website, integralrelationship.com, and you'll find his mail address at his homepage.
Yeah.
So one last thing that just comes to my mind is, because I was just thinking about what was the most beneficial thing I really took from reading your book and I've been to 5 workshops or something with you now. That was the idea that relationships are not something that necessarily just happens to you, but you can actually be a conscious co-creator of your relationships. So, yeah, I think that's a point for people to take with them.
You have any closing words, Ole?
Yeah, again, the technical problems have continued because I have somehow been out for a couple of times, so I haven't heard all. But just a practical information that your book, which in Danish is called Kvinder, en manual for mænd, the Integrale Parforhold, is coming out in its 2nd edition in a couple of weeks. It's just about to go into print, being printed, and it will be out, I think, in a couple of weeks. So then it will be available again. It hasn't been available for a couple of months now, but it will be available in a new, beautiful, re-edited version here in a couple of weeks. So I cannot recommend it strongly enough for people who are interested in working with couples in one or the other way, or just maybe being interested in love relationships, and who is not, I wonder. So read the book. It's a great book, and it's a great introduction to what integral is. So, and I hope that people don't think that they know what integral is if they haven't been reading about it or experiencing it, because it might sound as so many other things, or as something they know. And yes, it's the same on the surface, but the deeper you go into it, you'll find out that there's something totally new here. And I talk from a certain experience, I would say, that I was also fooled in the start, where I thought, well, I know all this. This is just kind of a holistic approach to the world, which it is, you know. Or this is just like integrative as I know it. Particularly some of my old students, they think they know what we're doing already. It's just something they know already, but they don't. So I remember that Einstein once said that he who cannot any longer wonder is as good as dead. And so keep being curious, keep on being open. Don't think you know, because life is getting boring and dead. So go on being curious. And I think this is an area which is really worthwhile being curious about. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ole and Johannes, for the opportunity, and everybody who's listening to this call and watching it and watching the video later. And there will also be assistants from ID Academy who will help in facilitating the training, and Johannes will be there. So it will be a great group experience for all of us. And learning and growing and healing experience.
Yeah, and thank you, both of you, Ole and Martin, from here as well. And as I said before, you can go to Martin's homepage to catch up with this coaching he's offering. Or if you have more practical questions, I guess it's better to contact ID Academy at their webpage, idacademy.org. Yeah, I think Ole's words about keep being open and keep wondering is a wonderful ending for this call. Yeah. So, do you have any last words besides that, Ole?
No.
No. It's not unnecessary. Just keep wondering and keep being open.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
And thank you to everybody who listened. Yeah.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.